The car was still running. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not confusing, not strange, wrong. Cars don't idle themselves for no reason. Engines don't keep humming on empty roads unless someone meant for them to. It was just after sunrise. The cold cut straight into the chest, sharp enough to make breathing hurt. The kind of cold that doesn't wake you up gently. It shocks you into awareness. A narrow access road cut through the foothills outside Valdese, North Carolina. Not a highway, not a shortcut. A road most people forgot existed because nothing ever happened there. That belief that nothing ever happens is exactly why what did happen felt like a violation. Something was already wrong before anyone saw the body. The running engine proved that. The blue sedan sat at an angle, half on gravel, half on dirt. Not abandoned. Not crashed. Paused. The brake lights glowed red, steady and patient. The engine hummed like it was waiting for someone to come back and turn the key, as if whoever had been driving planned to return. But no one did. Leaning against the driver's side door, partially hidden by it, was the body of a young woman. Not sprawled, not thrown, collapsed. There was no blood pooling beneath her, no broken glass, no marks on her arms, her face, her neck. Nothing that explained why she was on the ground instead of behind the wheel. Her body had simply stopped responding. That kind of stillness is disturbing because it refuses to explain itself. It doesn't scream violence. It doesn't announce danger. It leaves you staring, angry, asking questions no one can answer yet. And the worst part? The road stayed quiet. No cars passed. No one slowed down. The world kept moving while she didn't. What pushed this from confusing to infuriating was what she was wearing, or more accurately, what she wasn't. No jacket, no shoes meant for gravel or dirt, nothing that suggested she planned to be outside at all. Just a thin cotton nightshirt, the kind you wear when you expect to stay indoors, the kind you wear when you feel safe enough to sleep. That detail alone changed everything. Because people dressed like that aren't running away. They aren't meeting someone. They aren't prepared for danger. Danger came to them. Her bare feet touched the cold ground. The chill that burned through the air had already taken its hold. And still, there were no signs she fought. No scratches, no torn fabric, no chance. That should make you angry. Because whatever happened to her happened fast enough that preparation didn't matter, and quiet enough that no one heard. If something like this happened near you, would you recognize the warning before it was too late? Subscribe now. Miles away from that road, another truth waited. Not in the woods, not near the car, at her home. Her bedroom showed no signs of panic, no overturned furniture, no forced entry, nothing broken, nothing rushed. Everything was in place, too much in place. Sitting perfectly centered on her pillow was a small wooden owl, not dropped, not forgotten, not hidden, placed. That single detail erased every simple explanation. Because someone had been inside her room after she left, or before she was found, and had taken the time to leave something behind. That requires calm, it requires control, it requires confidence that no one would interrupt. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't panic. It was intentional. And that should make your chest tighten, because whoever did this wasn't guessing. They knew exactly what they were doing. None of this lined up. A young woman found dead without a single visible injury, a car left running for no clear reason, an object placed in her bedroom like a message meant to be discovered. Not chaos, not impulse, choice. Every detail points to someone who acted without fear of interruption, someone who wasn't rushed, someone who didn't worry about being caught. That should bother you, because crimes like this don't belong to the reckless. They belong to people who feel comfortable enough to leave things behind, comfortable enough to wait. This wasn't just a killing. It was the opening move of something that demanded attention, whether anyone wanted to give it or not. And if your instincts are telling you to keep watching, listen to them. Stories like this don't loosen their grip once they take hold. They stay with you. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Valdese, North Carolina, wasn't built for horror. In the early 1980s, it was the kind of town people moved to when they wanted life to slow down. A place meant to quiet the noise of the outside world. Streets stayed clean, faces stayed familiar. Days followed patterns people could rely on. Nothing here felt accidental. Homes were kept neat. Lawns were trimmed. Neighbors noticed when something changed, and usually nothing did. Predictability wasn't boring in Valdese. It was comforting. People believed order was permanent. The town sat near the Blue Ridge foothills, close enough to nature to feel grounded, far enough from cities to feel protected. It was the kind of place where parents raised children believing danger lived somewhere else. Not here. That belief wasn't careless. It was inherited, passed down through generations who trusted routine more than suspicion. And when a town is built on trust, it doesn't prepare for betrayal. Valdese was shaped by its beginnings. The town traced its roots to Waldensian immigrants, people who valued discipline, faith, and restraint. Problems were handled quietly. Family matters stayed within families. Community issues were addressed without spectacle. There was pride in that. You didn't air grievances publicly. You didn't invite unnecessary attention. And you certainly didn't expect violence to appear without warning. Outsiders were noticed immediately, not with hostility, but with awareness. People knew who belonged and who didn't. Familiarity wasn't forced, it grew naturally over time. That structure created closeness, but it also created silence. When something felt wrong, people hesitated to speak first. When behavior raised concern, it was often dismissed as misunderstanding. Trust was the default setting, and in places like this, trust can delay action. Because the thought that something truly terrible could happen nearby feels almost disrespectful to the life people believed they were living. The local police department reflected the town itself. Small, familiar, predictable. Chief Beaumont Bo Knox led a force that knew its residents by name. Officers spent most days settling disagreements, directing traffic, or responding to calls that ended with handshakes instead of handcuffs. They weren't chasing violent offenders. They weren't studying symbolic crimes. They were maintaining calm. Their job wasn't to hunt monsters. It was to keep order. And for years, that had been enough. No one trained for cases involving messages left behind. No one expected a crime that required interpretation instead of response. The department functioned on the belief that reason, routine, and familiarity would always win. But belief doesn't stop harm. It only delays the moment you're forced to face it. Have you ever lived somewhere like that? A place where safety feels permanent, where doors stay unlocked longer than they should, where danger feels theoretical, something discussed on the news, not whispered about at home. That belief lived deep in Valdese. It wasn't arrogance, it was habit, a confidence built from decades of quiet nights and ordinary mornings. People trusted patterns because patterns had never betrayed them before. But that confidence carried a cost. It made warning signs easy to dismiss. It made uncertainty uncomfortable to acknowledge. It made people slow to imagine the worst. And when the belief finally shattered, it didn't crack cleanly. It broke unevenly, leaving fear where certainty used to be. We trust quiet towns the most. That's usually the mistake. Laura Bennett was 19 years old, not a child, not fully an adult. She stood in that fragile space where life feels open, but still forgiving. Old enough to make plans, young enough to believe there would always be time to change them. High school was behind her. The next chapter hadn't started yet. She wasn't rushing. She didn't feel trapped. She believed the future would wait for her to arrive. That belief matters because it explains why she wasn't guarded, why she didn't live as if something bad could interrupt her life without warning. At 19, most people don't think in terms of endings. They think in terms of beginnings. Laura did too. And that innocence, quiet, ordinary, undeserved, makes what happened harder to accept. Laura wasn't reckless. She wasn't chasing trouble or testing limits. She moved through life carefully, aware of expectations and respectful of them. She was dependable, the kind of young woman parents trusted without hesitation and employers counted on without question. Laura worked 2 part-time jobs. By day, she stocked shelves at the Valdese pharmacy. By evening, she waitressed at a local diner, remembering regulars' orders and picking up extra shifts when someone didn't show. She didn't complain about working long hours. She understood responsibility as something you carried, not something you resented. Money mattered to her, not because she wanted luxury, but because she wanted stability. She saved carefully, thought ahead, made choices with purpose. People like Laura don't disappear easily. They leave behind questions that feel personal because everyone depended on them in some small way. College wasn't an abstract idea for Laura. It was planned. She intended to attend the University of North Carolina at Asheville, studying art alongside secondary education. Teaching wasn't a fallback. It was a goal. She wanted to create, and she wanted to pass that ability on to others. Art was where she felt most herself. Laura kept sketchbooks stacked neatly in her room, page after page filled with careful drawings, mountain ridges, aging storefronts, small details most people walked past without noticing. She didn't show them off. She didn't ask for praise. She practiced. There was patience in her work. Focus. The kind of attention that comes from believing effort matters, even when no one is watching. Those sketchbooks would later sit untouched. Plans unfinished. Lessons never taught. That's the cost people forget when they talk about loss in numbers instead of lives. At home, Laura's life was steady. She lived with her parents, Silas and Dahlia Bennett, in a modest ranch-style house close to the woods, close enough that the air carried the scent of pine after rain. Close enough that quiet felt natural. It was the kind of home where evenings followed patterns, dinner at the table, doors locked out of habit, not fear, familiar sounds settling the house into sleep. Laura had routines: work, home, sketching, rest. She told people where she was going. She let others know when she'd be back. Not because she was afraid, but because that was who she was. Her best friend Piper Davies would later say something that never stopped echoing. She always told me where she was going. Always. Think about that. Do you know someone like Laura? Someone predictable, responsible, careful. People like that don't expect danger to interrupt their routines, and they aren't supposed to disappear. Sunday, October 11th, 1981 didn't stand out. That's what makes it cruel. Laura worked a long double shift at the diner. Hours on her feet, the steady rhythm of orders, plates, and familiar faces. Nothing dramatic, nothing memorable. Just work that ended the way it always did. She came home tired. Dinner was simple, shared with her parents at the table. Ordinary conversation, no tension, no plans changed. No reason to think this night would matter more than any other. Afterward, Laura went to her room. She put on records, the kind she always listened to when she needed quiet. She sketched, pencil moving slowly across paper, filling space the way she always had. There was no rush in her movements, no sense of urgency. Nothing on that day hinted it would be the last time she'd do any of it. Around 11:30 p.m., Laura's father walked past her bedroom door. The hallway was dim. The house was quiet in the way it always became at night. Settled, familiar, safe. Light glowed beneath her door. That was all. No voices, no raised tones, no footsteps pacing the floor. Just that thin line of light spilling into the hallway. Proof that Laura was awake and exactly where she was supposed to be. He didn't stop, didn't knock, didn't think twice. There was no reason to. That small moment would later take on a weight it never asked for. A harmless glance that turned into a memory he couldn't escape. For decades, he would return to that image in his mind, wondering if there was something he should have noticed, something he could have said, something he missed. But on that night, it meant nothing, and that's what hurts the most. The house settled into sleep. Doors stayed closed. Lights went out one by one. The familiar sounds of the night took over, the kind people stop noticing because they trust them. Outside, the woods stood still. Wind moved through the trees without urgency. Nothing sounded wrong. Nothing demanded attention. There were no arguments, no late-night phone calls, no sudden changes in plans. Nothing that would make a parent get up and check twice. It was just another quiet night in Valdese. And that's the danger of routine. When routine breaks without warning, it doesn't arrive gently. It crashes into people who had no reason to brace themselves. That shock of realizing the last normal moment has already passed is something no one ever forgets. At exactly 7:01 a.m. on Monday, October 12th, Dahlia Bennett opened her daughter's bedroom door. She wasn't afraid. She expected to wake Laura for her pharmacy shift. Another ordinary morning, another routine that needed a gentle nudge to begin. But the room didn't respond the way it should have. The bed was untouched. The sheets lay smooth. The blankets were folded neatly, like they hadn't been moved at all. No creases, no warmth, no sign that anyone had slept there. For a moment, her mind tried to protect her. Maybe Laura left early. Maybe she stepped out. Maybe this still made sense. That brief search for reason is something parents never forget because it's the last moment before fear takes control. Something was already wrong. She just hadn't named it yet. Dahlia's eyes moved to the pillow. That's when the room shifted. Centered perfectly on the fabric was a small object, placed with care, not carelessness, not dropped, not forgotten. A wooden owl, smooth to the touch, detailed in its carving, solid in a way that suggested time had been spent on it. This wasn't something rushed. This wasn't something accidental. It didn't belong there. And that was the problem. Because bedrooms don't rearrange themselves. Objects don't appear without someone bringing them in. Laura's purse sat on the nightstand, her wallet beside it, her keys exactly where they always were. Everything Laura needed to leave was still inside the house, which meant whatever took her didn't allow preparation. It acted faster than thought. In that moment, understanding didn't arrive. Fear did. Dahlia moved to the window. She looked outside, already hoping she wouldn't see what she knew was missing. Laura's car wasn't there. The driveway sat empty, quiet in a way it had never felt before. No sound of an engine warming up, no sign she had left a note or a message behind. That's when panic fully arrived, not all at once. Not loudly. It crept in, first as disbelief, then as urgency, then as a weight that pressed down on every thought at once, because now the pieces no longer fit. Laura hadn't taken her purse. She hadn't taken her keys. She hadn't taken anything she would need to go anywhere. Most danger doesn't announce itself by breaking doors. It leaves signs behind. And once you notice them, there's no way to look away. At 8:14 a.m., a forestry worker named Harold Kincaid made a routine radio call. At least that's what he thought it was. Finding cars along rural access roads wasn't unusual. Engines overheated, tires failed. Sometimes hikers left vehicles behind and walked into the woods for hours at a time. This looked like one of those situations. A blue sedan sat half off the road. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming from a distance. Until Harold got closer. The engine was still running. The brake lights glowed steadily. The driver's door stood open. That combination didn't belong together. People don't leave cars that way unless something interrupts them. And then he saw her. Laura Bennett's body rested against the open door, her head angled to the side, her bare feet touching the gravel. The cold had already drained color from her skin. There was no blood, no obvious injury, no sign she had fought anyone. It didn't look like violence. It looked like motion that never finished. Harold stepped back and radioed it in. The routine morning ended right there. The first siren cut through the woods minutes later. Then another. Sound traveled differently out there. Longer, sharper, impossible to ignore. It wasn't a noise Valdese heard often, especially not in that place. Police shut down the road. Tape went up between trees that had never framed a scene like this before. The blue sedan kept idling, fuel burning away while no one could explain why it had been left like that. Officers stood back, careful not to disturb what they didn't yet understand. There was no obvious threat, no weapon in sight, no clear reason she should be there at all. The still-running engine became a problem no one could answer. If she had been driven there, where was the other person? If she drove herself, why leave the door open? Why leave the car on? Questions stacked up faster than facts. When the medical examiner arrived, the hope was simple. Find something concrete. Anything that could explain why a healthy young woman was dead without a mark on her. But the first examination offered no relief. Nothing visible explained her death. And that absence of injury, of struggle, of answers, only made the situation heavier. Because now everyone understood the same thing at once. This wasn't going to be simple. The medical examiner worked carefully at the roadside. There were no wounds to explain, no marks on her arms or neck, no bruises where someone might have held her down. Her hands were clean, her fingernails unbroken. Nothing suggested a fight. Nothing suggested panic. That absence created its own kind of dread, because death without visible cause feels unnatural in a different way. It removes the comfort of explanation. It forces everyone watching to admit they don't understand what they're seeing. Officers exchanged looks instead of answers. If she wasn't attacked here, then where had it happened? If she wasn't injured, then what had stopped her body? If no one was nearby, then how had she ended up on this road at all? Each question led nowhere, and as the morning stretched on, one truth became harder to ignore. Whatever had happened to Laura Bennett didn't fit the rules this town understood. Laura Bennett had no injuries, no bruises, no fractures, no needle marks, no signs she had been held down. Her fingernails were clean, her hands unbroken. There were no marks that suggested she tried to defend herself, and yet she was dead. That contradiction sat heavy in the examination room. Death without damage leaves no clear path forward. It strips away the usual answers and replaces them with silence. The autopsy ruled out heart failure. It ruled out carbon monoxide exposure. It ruled out physical harm. Each result closed a door investigators expected to walk through. Then came the conclusion no one wanted: acute poisoning by an unidentified paralytic agent. Something had stopped her body without a struggle, without warning, without leaving behind anything laboratories in 1981 could identify. That should unsettle you, because it meant this wasn't chance. It wasn't panic. It wasn't reckless. It meant someone understood how to end a life without leaving marks. If someone could do this once, they could do it again. Subscribe so you don't miss the warning signs. Investigators now faced a truth they weren't ready for. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. The conclusion changed everything. This wasn't a crime born from anger or panic. There was no evidence of a sudden argument, no sign of force, no indication of a struggle that got out of control. What happened to Laura required preparation. Someone had access to substances most people never encounter. Someone understood dosage, timing, and effect well enough to leave no trace behind, and someone was confident enough to believe it would work. That realization widened the scope of fear, because now the question wasn't just who could have done this, but how many people might have been capable of it without ever raising suspicion. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. And once investigators accepted that, the case stopped feeling local. It started feeling dangerous. Back at the Bennett home, attention turned to the object left behind. The wooden owl was small enough to fit in a palm, yet heavier than expected. Made from dark oak. Smoothed and finished with care. It wasn't rough. It wasn't rushed. The craftsmanship stood out immediately. Each feather had been carved with purpose, each line clean and deliberate. Whoever made it knew exactly what they were doing and took their time doing it. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't a keepsake someone forgot. It was meant to be found. Owls have carried meaning across cultures for centuries, often tied to death, to watchfulness, to the idea of seeing what others miss. That context mattered, because this object wasn't hidden. It wasn't tucked away or carelessly dropped. It was placed, centered on Laura's pillow, aligned with intention. That single detail ruled out coincidence. Whoever left it had been inside her room, not hurried, not careless, comfortable enough to arrange it just right. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. Could someone enter your home and leave something behind without you knowing? Most people never consider that possibility. That's exactly why it works. Investigators didn't focus on the owl alone. They focused on where it was. It wasn't near the door. It wasn't placed on a shelf. It wasn't left somewhere casual. It sat in the exact center of Laura's pillow. That mattered. Centering requires attention. It requires stopping, adjusting, checking alignment. Someone stood there long enough to make sure it looked right. That tells you something important. Whoever entered that room wasn't nervous. They weren't rushing to get out. They didn't fear being interrupted. They believed they had time, and time is confidence. That confidence raised questions no one wanted to ask yet. Questions about access, about familiarity, about how well someone understood the rhythms of that house. Because this wasn't a break-in, it was an entry. Once investigators accepted what the placement meant, another thought followed, one people rarely say out loud. This wasn't random access. Whoever entered that room understood timing. They knew when no one would walk in. They knew how to move through the house without drawing attention. That kind of access doesn't come from chance. It comes from familiarity. That realization shifted the fear from the woods back into the town itself, back into routines, back into places people believed were protected simply because they were familiar. Because if someone could cross that boundary once, quietly, confidently, they could do it again. And most people never prepare for danger that doesn't announce itself. They assume safety is permanent. That assumption is usually what gets tested first. Small towns don't wait for proof. They wait for a name. And Valdese already had one. Derek Grinch, 23 years old, out of work, known for losing his temper, known for lingering near the diner after closing time, watching people come and go. Derek had asked Laura out twice. Both times she declined, politely, calmly. That should have been the end of it. Instead, after her death, memories began to shift. Someone recalled a disagreement that hadn't seemed important before. Someone claimed he watched her too closely. Someone mentioned he left town for a single day. None of it proved anything, but it didn't have to. Suspicion spreads faster when people are afraid, and fear looks for shortcuts. Police questioned Derek for hours. They searched his trailer, took samples of wood, bagged his clothes. They found nothing. No carvings, no substances, no evidence tying him to Laura beyond familiarity and proximity. Still, the town had already made up its mind. Ask yourself something hard. If you lived there, would you have done the same? Chosen certainty over truth? This is how lives get destroyed without a trial. Stay informed. Subscribe. Once Derek's name took hold, facts stopped mattering as much. Every neutral action became suspicious. Every ordinary habit felt loaded with meaning. The absence of evidence didn't clear him. It only fueled the belief that he was clever enough to hide it. People crossed the street to avoid him. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Rumors moved faster than official statements. In a town built on familiarity, being singled out like that is isolating in ways outsiders rarely understand. Derek didn't just lose trust, he lost standing. Jobs dried up, friends pulled back, doors closed quietly. Law enforcement felt the pressure too. When a community decides on a version of events, anything that challenges it feels like betrayal. Clearing Derek without an arrest would mean admitting the town had been wrong, and that's a hard thing for any group to do. So the case stalled. No charges, no arrest, no resolution. Just a man marked by suspicion and a town convinced it had already found its answer. By mid-November, the pressure became impossible to ignore. State investigators were brought in, fresh eyes, new voices, people who hadn't grown up with Laura, hadn't watched Derek from across a diner counter, hadn't absorbed the town's assumptions. They reviewed the scene again. They studied the carving. They reconsidered the timing. And they reached a conclusion that unsettled everyone listening. This wasn't anger. What happened to Laura showed restraint, planning, a calm hand guiding every step. Whoever did this controlled when she died, where she was found, and how long it would take before anyone understood what they were looking at. The running car wasn't a mistake. It bought time. It bent the timeline. It sent investigators down the wrong path. The owl wasn't emotional. It followed a rule, a pattern, something meant to be seen, not felt. And when those traits were laid out clearly, one name stopped fitting. Derek Grinch. He reacted emotionally, he argued. He lashed out when stressed. Nothing about him suggested patience or precision. The person responsible showed neither panic nor impulse. They showed discipline. As suspicion drifted away from Derek, something else took its place. Fear. Because once the easy answer collapsed, what remained was far worse. It meant the person responsible had blended in. It meant they hadn't been questioned, watched, or even considered. They were still out there. The case slowed. Leads dried up. Time moved forward while answers stayed behind. Files thickened, but progress didn't follow. Residents felt it in small ways. Doors locked earlier. Lights stayed on longer. Conversations lowered their volume. People stopped asking who did it and started wondering who might be next. And if you're still watching and not subscribed, ask yourself why. Tell us in the comments what's stopping you. 3 weeks passed after Laura Bennett's death. Not quietly, not peacefully. The town waited, holding its breath, hoping time would soften what answers couldn't provide. On November the 2nd, 1981, that hope collapsed. Silas Bennett arrived at the Hearthstone Diner just before sunrise. Sleep had become shallow since Laura's funeral. Routine was the only thing keeping his days from coming apart. That morning, something was waiting. Inside the diner's mailbox sat a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address, no explanation for how it arrived there. Inside was a small wooden carving, a feather, dark oak, smooth, light in the hand, carved with such care that every ridge looked lifelike, as if it might shift with the slightest movement. Folded beside it was a narrow strip of paper, typed, "The first feather has fallen." Silas felt his strength leave him. This wasn't grief returning. This wasn't memory resurfacing. This was confirmation. Laura's death hadn't been an ending. It had been a beginning. If someone could wait weeks to send a message like this, think about what that patience suggests. Subscribe now. The envelope shifted the case instantly. Up until that moment, investigators had been chasing explanations, causes, timelines, physical details that might point to a person or place. The message changed the focus. This wasn't about what had already happened. It was about what was coming next. The wording mattered. The first feather, not a feather, not the only one. The message implied sequence, order, progression. Someone wasn't finished. And more troubling than the threat itself was the restraint behind it. Weeks had passed. No noise, no mistakes, no attempt to rush attention. That kind of patience requires discipline. It also requires confidence. Because sending a message like that assumes one thing, that no one can stop you. The response was immediate. Police reopened the case with urgency. Mailboxes were checked. Patrols increased. Warnings were issued, but carefully. Too much alarm could tear the town apart faster than silence ever did. It didn't matter. Fear moved on its own schedule. 3 weeks later, on November 23rd, another envelope appeared. This time, it wasn't at a home. It was inside the Valdese Public Library. No stamp, no return address, no explanation. Inside was another carving, another feather. This one was longer, sharper in its lines, less gentle in its shape. The change felt intentional, as if escalation had been planned from the start. Folded beside it was another typed note. "The second feather is delivered. The bell remains." Investigators didn't debate what this meant. This wasn't randomness. This wasn't noise. It was sequence. Someone was keeping count. And the waiting, the silence between messages, was part of the design. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. How many crimes stay unsolved because people assume killers act quickly? Some don't. Some wait. The phrase didn't sit quietly. "The bell remains." Investigators read it again and again. The wording felt deliberate, too deliberate to ignore. This wasn't a flourish. It wasn't filler. It was a condition. Something had not yet been triggered. Something was still waiting. A bell implies warning. It implies an ending. It implies a moment when silence breaks. And the message suggested that moment hadn't arrived yet. That detail mattered more than the carving itself, because it meant Laura's death wasn't the focus anymore. It was the opening move. Police began reviewing anything that resembled sequence or order, dates, times, routines, places where messages could be placed without being seen, places meant to be discovered by the right person, libraries, churches, community boards, spaces built on trust. The town felt smaller after that, not because danger was new, but because patience had entered the picture. And patience is harder to defend against than chaos. December the 2nd, 1981. No envelope arrived that morning, no typed message, no warning tucked into a mailbox. Instead, the discovery came just before dawn. Outside the Bennett home, hanging from a large oak tree, was a wooden bell, perfectly balanced, carefully carved, completely silent. It moved slightly with the wind, slow and deliberate, as if placed to be noticed, not heard. Investigators didn't need time to understand what this meant. The sequence was complete: the owl, the feathers, the bell. Each object had arrived in order. Each had been delivered with restraint. Each had been placed where it could not be ignored. In some traditions, a bell marks release, an ending, a closing signal. For the person responsible, this wasn't unfinished work. It was completion. And once the bell appeared, everything stopped. No more messages, no more carvings, no more signs. The activity didn't fade. It ended. If something like this went quiet near you, wouldn't you want to be ready? Subscribe. After the bell appeared, nothing followed. No envelopes showed up weeks later. No objects surfaced months later. No messages resurfaced the following year. The silence was complete. And that was almost worse than the threats, because silence doesn't mean safety. It means intent has already been satisfied. Whatever outcome the sender wanted, fear, attention, completion, it had been achieved. Investigators waited for a mistake. One never came. The town slowly returned to routine, but something had shifted permanently. People noticed unfamiliar cars. They hesitated before opening mail. They questioned things they once ignored. Not because danger was visible, but because it had proven it could arrive, perform its work, and leave without consequence. And when something can do that once, it doesn't need to announce itself again. By mid-1982, momentum disappeared. The carvings were examined again and again. Specialists compared techniques, styles, pressure marks. No known craftsperson matched the work. The oak itself offered no help. It was common to the region, present in homes, shops, and workshops across the county. The poison remained a blank space. No laboratory could name it. No test could isolate it. No record could point to where it came from. The typewritten notes led nowhere. The font wasn't rare. The spacing wasn't unique. The machine could have belonged to anyone, and no witness ever came forward. Not one person reported seeing someone unfamiliar. Not one person recalled a strange delivery. Not one person noticed the moments that mattered. Years later, investigators would admit something difficult to accept. The person responsible didn't leave errors. They left uncertainty. Over time, a pattern became impossible to ignore. The running car wasn't panic. The owl wasn't emotional. The sequence wasn't confusion. It was control. Every step showed restraint. Every action showed foresight. Nothing appeared rushed or reactive. The person responsible didn't improvise their way through the crime. They followed a plan. That reality unsettled investigators more than any missing clue. Because most cases break when pressure causes mistakes. Most people slip. Most plans crack. This one didn't. That's why this case continues to trouble those who studied it later. Not because it was violent, but because it was measured. It didn't feel chaotic. It felt intentional. And if stories like this leave you uneasy, they should. That discomfort is awareness taking shape. So who killed Laura Bennett? Was it someone she trusted? Someone close enough to know her schedule, her habits, the quiet rhythms of her life? Was it someone who watched from a distance, learning her routines without ever stepping forward? Or was it someone passing through, drawn not to Laura herself, but to the chance to carry out something calculated and unforgettable? The truth is uncomfortable. We may never know. No arrest was made. No confession surfaced. No explanation closed the file. And that uncertainty became the lasting damage. Because when a crime has no ending, it doesn't fade away. It lingers in questions, in doubt, in the quiet fear that maybe the person responsible never left. If you believe something like this could never happen near you, pause. That's exactly what people believed here. Laura Bennett was 19. She had plans. She had routines. She had people who loved her and expected her to come home. What she didn't have was protection from someone who understood patience better than fear. This case isn't remembered because of violence. It's remembered because of restraint. Because someone proved they could enter a life quietly, take it without resistance, leave a message and disappear without consequence. That truth doesn't stay in the past, it sits with us. Because cases like this don't warn you loudly. They don't break in. They don't rush. They wait for comfort. They wait for routine. They wait for belief. And if this story made you uncomfortable, that reaction matters. Because awareness is the only defense people ever have. If this happened near you tomorrow, wouldn't you want to recognize the signs sooner? Subscribe now, before silence becomes the warning. And if you still won't subscribe, tell us why in the comments. What's holding you back? We read everyone. Laura Bennett was 19 years old. Her story didn't end with answers, but it doesn't have to end in silence. Cold case archives exist to bring understanding, perspective, and awareness to cases like this, so we learn, remember, and stay informed together. Subscribe to Cold Case Archives, because knowledge gives clarity, and clarity gives courage.